My name is Richard. I am 68 years old. For 30 years, I was the CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company. My name was on the letterhead. My signature was on the paychecks. When I walked into a room, people stood up. When I spoke, people listened. I was somebody. And then 2 years ago, I retired. And overnight, I became nobody. A ghost in a world that I used to command. And I am here to tell you about that fall. Because it is a fall that is coming for many of you, and you are not prepared. For 3 decades, my identity was my job. It wasn't a part of my life, it was my life. I woke up thinking about the company. I went to sleep thinking about the company. My friendships were with board members and clients. My hobbies were golf with suppliers and charity dinners with industry leaders. My wife Eleanor used to joke that she was married to the company, not to me. She wasn't wrong. I was Richard, the CEO. The two were inseparable. I had fused my sense of self to my title, like a soldier welding his armor to his skin. It made me powerful, it made me invincible, and it made me incredibly, dangerously vulnerable. The day I retired was a celebration. There was a big party, speeches, a gold watch. It felt like a victory lap. I had done it. I had built a successful company, secured my family's future, and earned my rest. I walked out of that office for the last time feeling like a king who had just won a war. I had no idea that I was actually a king being led to the guillotine. The first few weeks were a blur of travel and leisure. Eleanor and I went to Italy, a trip we had been postponing for 20 years. It was beautiful, but I felt a strange sense of irrelevance. I was just another tourist. No one knew who I was. No one cared. I was used to being the most important person in the room. Now I was just a face in the crowd. It was unsettling. When we got back, the real horror began. The emails stopped. The phone calls stopped. The invitations stopped. The world that had revolved around me for 30 years had moved on without me. I was a planet that had been knocked out of its orbit, spinning aimlessly in the dark. I would call up old colleagues and they would be polite but distant. They were busy. They had meetings. They had problems to solve. My problems, the problem of my own emptiness, were of no interest to them. One day I went to a local coffee shop, the same one I used to go to every morning to grab a coffee before work. The barista, a young woman who had served me for years, looked at me with a blank stare. "Can I help you?" she asked. She didn't recognize me. Without my suit and my briefcase and my air of importance, I was just another old man. I was nobody. I walked out of that coffee shop and sat in my car, and for the first time in my adult life, I cried. Not because the barista didn't recognize me, but because I didn't recognize myself. That was my rock bottom. The moment I realized that Richard, the CEO, was dead, and Richard, the man, was a complete stranger to me. I had spent so long being a title that I had forgotten how to be a person. I had no hobbies that weren't related to work. I had no friends who weren't related to work. I had no purpose that wasn't related to work. I was a hollow man, a beautifully tailored suit with nothing inside. Eleanor saw it, of course. She had been seeing it for years. She had been trying to warn me. She had been trying to get me to cultivate a life outside of the office. But I was too busy, too important. I thought she was being naive. I thought my work was my life. I didn't realize that it was actually my prison. One night she sat me down. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just looked at me with a profound sadness in her eyes. "Richard," she said, "I miss you. I have missed you for 30 years. I thought that when you retired, I would finally get my husband back. But you're not here. You're just a ghost of a man who used to be a CEO, and I can't live with a ghost anymore." Her words were a slap in the face, a cold, hard dose of reality. She was right. I was a ghost. I was haunting my own life, and I was about to lose the only person who still saw me, the only person who still cared. That was the beginning of my long, slow, painful journey back to life. A journey of rediscovering the man I had abandoned 30 years ago. A journey of learning how to be Richard, not the CEO. And it has been the hardest, most humbling, and most rewarding journey of my life. So what did I learn? What is the warning I am here to give you? It is this: do not let your title become your identity. Do not let your work become your life. Do not weld your armor to your skin. Because one day that title will be gone. That work will be over. That armor will be stripped away. And if there is nothing left underneath, you will be lost. You will be nobody. So how do you prevent this? How do you prepare for the death of your professional self? You have to start building a life outside of your work. A real life. A life with hobbies and passions and friendships that have nothing to do with your job. A life with a purpose that is not tied to your paycheck. A life where you are a person first and a professional second. I had to start from scratch. I had to be a beginner again. I took a woodworking class. I was terrible at it, but I loved it. I loved the smell of the wood, the feel of the tools, the satisfaction of creating something with my own hands. I joined a hiking club. I was the slowest one in the group, but I loved it. I loved the fresh air, the beautiful scenery, the camaraderie of my fellow hikers. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter. I cleaned cages and walked dogs. It was humbling work, but I loved it. I loved the unconditional love of the animals, the gratitude in their eyes. I was doing something that mattered, something that had nothing to do with profit margins or shareholder value. And most importantly, I started to reconnect with Eleanor. I started to be a husband again, a real husband. I listened to her. I talked to her. I shared my fears and my hopes with her. We started to build a new life together, a life based on who we are, not what we did, a life of shared experiences and shared dreams and shared laughter, a life of being us. I am still a work in progress. I still have moments of panic, of feeling like a nobody. The ghost of the CEO still haunts me sometimes. But now, I have a life to cling to, a real life, a life that is mine, a life that is not defined by a title, but by the man I am becoming. So my warning to you is this: do not wait until you retire to start living. Start living now. Start building a life that is so rich and so full and so meaningful that when you finally do retire, it is not a death, but a birth of a new you, a you that is not defined by what you do, but by who you are, a you that is not a nobody, but a somebody who is loved and connected and alive, a somebody who is finally, truly free. Let me tell you about the specific moments of humiliation, because that is what it is. It is a series of small public deaths that chip away at your soul until there is nothing left. It is the universe holding up a mirror and forcing you to see the empty space where your identity used to be. The first was at a charity gala, about 6 months after I retired. It was an event I used to co-chair. My name was on the invitation. My company was a major sponsor. I was a big deal. This time I was just a guest. I walked in with Eleanor, and it was like I had become invisible. People who used to rush over to shake my hand now just gave me a polite nod. People who used to laugh at my jokes now just smiled vaguely and moved on. I was standing in a room full of people I knew, and I felt like a complete stranger. At one point, I went to get a drink at the bar, and a young man, a new hire at my old company, clapped me on the shoulder. "Richard, right?" he said. "You used to be the big boss. What are you up to these days? Keeping busy?" He meant it to be friendly, but it felt like a punch in the gut. What are you up to these days? The question hung in the air, a brutal indictment of my own nothingness. I mumbled something about travel and golf, and he quickly lost interest and turned to talk to someone more important, someone who was still in the game. I spent the rest of the night hiding in a corner, nursing a drink, feeling like a ghost at my own funeral. The second moment was at my golf club. I had been a member for 20 years. It was where I made deals, where I networked, where I cemented my status. I was a good golfer, but that wasn't the point. The point was the power. The point was being in the inner circle. After I retired, I kept my membership. I thought it would be a way to stay connected, but it wasn't. The invitations to the exclusive foursomes stopped. The conversations in the clubhouse were about deals I wasn't a part of, about people I no longer knew. I was on the outside looking in. One day I was on the driving range, and a group of younger members, the new generation of CEOs, were a few stalls down. They were laughing and joking, and I could hear snippets of their conversation. They were talking about a big merger, a deal that was shaking up the industry, a deal that I would have been in the middle of just a year ago. Now I was just an old man hitting balls on the range, a relic of a bygone era. I felt a surge of rage, of jealousy, of bitter, impotent fury. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them who I was, to remind them of the power I used to wield. But I didn't. I just packed up my clubs and went home, defeated. The third and most painful moment was with my own son. My son Mark is a successful lawyer. I was always proud of him, but I was also hard on him. I pushed him to be the best, to achieve, to win. Our relationship was more like a mentorship than a father-son bond. After I retired, I tried to stay involved in his career. I would call him up and offer him advice, critique his strategies, try to be his unofficial consultant. He was patient at first, but then he started to pull away. He would be too busy to talk. He would give me one-word answers. One day I called him to discuss a big case he was working on. I had read about it in the paper and I had some ideas. He cut me off mid-sentence. "Dad," he said, his voice tight with a frustration he could no longer contain. "I appreciate the thought, but I've got this. I have my own team. I don't need you to be my CEO anymore." And then he said the words that broke my heart. "I just need you to be my dad." I hung up the phone, and I felt a wave of shame so profound that it almost brought me to my knees. He was right. I had never been his dad. I had been his boss. And now that I was no longer a boss, I didn't know how to be anything else. These 3 moments, the gala, the golf club, the phone call with my son, they were my crucible. They were the fire that burned away the last vestiges of my old identity. They forced me to confront the truth that I had been avoiding for 30 years, that I had built my entire life on a foundation of sand, that my sense of self was so fragile that it could be shattered by a careless question, a missed invitation, a single phone call, that I was not a man of substance but a man of status. And when the status was gone, so was the man. So what is the lesson here? It is a simple and brutal one. Your job is not your life. Your title is not your identity. Your power is not your worth. These are all temporary. They are all fleeting. And if you build your house on them, it will be washed away in the first storm. You have to build your house on something more solid, something that cannot be taken away from you. You have to build it on your character, on your values, on your relationships, on your passions, on your purpose. You have to build it on who you are, not what you do. This is not an easy lesson to learn, especially for men of my generation. We were raised to believe that our worth was measured by our success, that our value was determined by our paycheck, that our identity was our business card. And we bought into it. We sacrificed our families, our friendships, our hobbies, our souls on the altar of our careers. And for what? For a gold watch and a pat on the back? For a few years of empty leisure before we fade into obscurity? It is a terrible bargain, a fool's bargain, and I made it. But here is the good news. It is never too late to break the bargain. It is never too late to start building a new life, a real life, a life of substance, a life of meaning. It is hard work. It is humbling work. It is painful work. But it is the most important work you will ever do, because it is the work of saving your own soul. I am still in the early stages of this work. I am still a beginner. I am still learning how to be a husband, a father, a friend, a man. But I am learning. I am growing. I am changing. And for the first time in a long time, I am hopeful. I am hopeful that I can build a new life, a better life, a life that is not defined by what I have lost, but by what I am finding. A life where I am not a nobody, but a somebody who is learning to love and to be loved for who he is, not for what he was. And that, I am discovering, is the only kind of somebody worth being. Let me go deeper. Let me tell you about the anatomy of becoming nobody, because it is not a single event. It is a slow erosion, a death by 1,000 cuts. And each cut leaves a scar that never quite heals. When I was CEO, my days were structured down to the minute. My assistant managed my calendar like a military operation. Every meeting, every call, every decision was choreographed. I was important. My time was valuable. People waited for me. People needed me. And that need, that constant validation of my importance, it was like a drug. It was intoxicating. It was addictive. And I didn't realize how dependent I had become on it until it was gone. The morning after my retirement party, I woke up at 5:30 a.m., like I had for 30 years. I reached for my phone to check my emails. There were 3. 2 were spam. 1 was from my dentist reminding me of an appointment. That was it. No urgent messages from the board. No crisis that needed my immediate attention. No one asking for my approval, my insight, my leadership. The silence was deafening. I sat there in bed, staring at my phone, feeling a panic rising in my chest. What was I supposed to do with my day? What was I supposed to do with my life? Eleanor was still asleep. I got up, got dressed in my usual suit and tie. Force of habit. I went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. And then I realized I had nowhere to go. No office to drive to, no meetings to attend, no empire to run. I was a general without an army, a captain without a ship. I sat there for 3 hours just staring at the wall, paralyzed by the sheer emptiness of my own existence. That first week was a blur of forced activity. I played golf every day. I read the newspaper cover to cover. I organized my home office. I cleaned out the garage. I was desperately trying to fill the void. But it was like trying to fill the ocean with a teaspoon. The void was too big, too deep, too all-consuming. And by the end of that first week, I was exhausted. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally, spiritually exhausted. I was running on empty, and I had no idea how to refuel. The second week, Eleanor suggested we take that trip to Italy. She had been planning it for months. She was excited. She thought it would be a new beginning for us, a chance to reconnect. I agreed, but my heart wasn't in it. I was still mourning the death of my old life. I was still clinging to the ghost of who I used to be. Italy was beautiful. The food was incredible. The art was breathtaking. But I couldn't enjoy it. I was too busy checking my phone, hoping for a message from the office. Hoping that they would realize they couldn't function without me. Hoping that they would beg me to come back. But the messages never came. The office was functioning just fine without me. Better even. My successor was making changes, implementing new strategies. The company was moving forward, and I was stuck in the past, a relic, a has-been. One afternoon we were in Florence, standing in front of Michelangelo's David. Eleanor was in awe. She was talking about the beauty, the craftsmanship, the genius, and all I could think about was, this statue has been here for 500 years, and it will be here for 500 more. And I will be forgotten in 5, maybe less. I was standing in front of one of the greatest works of art in human history, and all I felt was my own insignificance, my own mortality, my own nothingness. That night back at the hotel, Eleanor asked me what was wrong. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me, she never did. She looked at me with those sad, knowing eyes, and she said, "Richard, you're not here, you're somewhere else. You're still at the office, you're still the CEO, but you're not. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start living again." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't, because she was right. I was a ghost haunting my own life. When we got back from Italy, things got worse. The phone calls from old colleagues became less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. The invitations to industry events dried up. I was no longer on the guest list. I was no longer relevant. I tried to stay involved. I would call up the new CEO, offer my advice, my insights. He was polite, but I could hear the impatience in his voice. He didn't need my advice. He had his own team, his own vision. I was yesterday's news, and yesterday's news doesn't sell papers. I started to notice how people treated me differently. At the grocery store, I was just another old man. No one recognized me, no one cared. At the bank, the teller didn't know my name, even though I had been banking there for 20 years. At the gym, the young trainers didn't give me a second glance. I was invisible. I was nobody. And it was a slow, agonizing realization. A realization that my entire sense of self had been built on external validation, on the recognition of others, on the power of my position. And without that position, I was nothing. The charity gala was the first public humiliation, but it wasn't the last. There were many more. Small, subtle moments that chipped away at my soul. Like the time I ran into an old business rival at a restaurant. He used to fear me. He used to respect me. Now he just gave me a condescending smile and said, "Richard, how's retirement treating you? Playing a lot of golf, I bet." It was a dismissal, a pat on the head, like I was a child who had been sent to play while the adults did the real work. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream at him. But I just smiled and nodded and said, "Yes, lots of golf." And I felt a piece of my soul die. Or the time I went to a networking event, thinking I could still make connections, still be a player, but no one wanted to talk to me. They were all too busy networking with people who still had power, who still had influence. I was a nobody, a has-been, a ghost at a feast. I left that event early, went home and drank half a bottle of scotch. Eleanor found me passed out on the couch. She didn't say anything. She just covered me with a blanket and went to bed. And I knew, in that moment, that I was losing her too, that I was losing everything. The golf club incident was particularly painful because golf had always been my sanctuary. It was where I felt powerful, where I felt in control. But after I retired, it became a reminder of everything I had lost. The younger members, the new generation of CEOs, they didn't see me as a peer. They saw me as a relic, an old man who used to be somebody. One day I overheard two of them talking in the locker room. They didn't know I was there. One of them said, "Did you see Richard out there? He's still trying to hang on. It's kind of sad, really." The other one laughed and said, "Yeah, he doesn't realize his time is over. He's yesterday's man." I stood there frozen, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to tell them who I was, what I had accomplished, but I didn't, because I knew they were right. I was yesterday's man, and yesterday's men don't matter. The phone call with my son Mark was the breaking point. It was the moment I realized that I had not only lost my professional identity, but I had also lost my personal relationships. I had sacrificed my family on the altar of my career, and now I was reaping the consequences. Mark had always been a dutiful son. He had always respected me, but he had never loved me. Not really, because I had never been a father to him. I had been a boss, a mentor, a critic, but never a dad. And when he told me, "I just need you to be my dad," it was like a knife to the heart, because I didn't know how to be a dad. I had spent so long being a CEO that I had forgotten how to be a human being. After that phone call, I hit rock bottom. I stopped getting out of bed, I stopped shaving, I stopped caring. Eleanor tried to help, but I pushed her away. I was drowning in my own misery, and I was taking her down with me. One night, she sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Richard, I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you destroy yourself. I can't watch you destroy us. You need to get help. You need to talk to someone. Because if you don't, I'm leaving." It was an ultimatum, a line in the sand, and it was the wake-up call I needed. I started seeing a therapist. It was humiliating at first. I was Richard, the CEO. I didn't need therapy, I didn't need help, but I did. I needed it desperately. The therapist helped me see that my identity crisis was not unique, that many men, especially men of my generation, define themselves by their work. And when that work is gone, they feel lost. They feel like nobody. The therapist helped me understand that I needed to build a new identity, an identity based not on what I did, but on who I was, an identity based on my values, my relationships, my passions. It was hard work, it was painful work, but it was necessary work. I started small. I took a woodworking class at the local community college. I was terrible at it. My hands, which had signed million-dollar deals, couldn't even hold a chisel properly. But I kept at it, and slowly I started to improve. I made a small box. It was crooked and ugly, but it was mine. I had made it with my own hands, and that felt good. It felt real. It felt like an accomplishment that had nothing to do with money or power or status. I joined a hiking group. I was the oldest and slowest member, but they welcomed me. They didn't care that I used to be a CEO, they just cared that I showed up, that I tried. We would hike through the mountains and I would feel a sense of peace that I had never felt in a boardroom. I would breathe the fresh air, feel the sun on my face, and for a few hours I would forget about being nobody. I would just be Richard, a man on a hike, and that was enough. I started volunteering at an animal shelter. I cleaned cages, I walked dogs, I fed cats. It was humble work that no one would ever praise me for, but it was meaningful work. The animals didn't care about my resume. They didn't care about my title. They just cared that I was there, that I was kind, that I was present. And their unconditional love, their simple gratitude, it started to heal something inside me, something that had been broken for a very long time. And most importantly, I started to rebuild my relationship with Eleanor. I started to listen to her, really listen, not just wait for my turn to talk. I started to ask her about her day, her dreams, her fears. I started to be vulnerable with her, to share my own fears, my own pain. We started to take long walks together, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. We started to laugh again, to really laugh. Not the polite laughter of a business dinner, but the deep, genuine laughter of two people who love each other. We were building a new life together, a life based on who we were, not what we had been. And it was beautiful. It was real. It was enough. I am still a work in progress. I still have bad days. Days when I wake up and feel the old panic, the old emptiness. Days when I miss the power, the status, the validation. But those days are becoming less frequent. And on the good days, I feel a sense of peace, a sense of purpose, a sense of joy that I never felt when I was CEO. Because I am no longer living for external validation. I am living for myself, for my relationships, for my passions. I am living as Richard, not Richard the CEO, just Richard. And that, I am discovering, is the only kind of life worth living. So my final message to you is this: do not make the same mistake I made. Do not let your job become your identity. Do not let your title become your worth. Do not sacrifice your relationships, your passions, your soul on the altar of your career. Because one day that career will be over. And if you have nothing else, you will be left with nothing. You will be nobody. But if you start building a life now, a real life, a life of substance and meaning and connection, then when that day comes, you will not be nobody. You will be somebody. A somebody who is loved and valued and alive. A somebody who is free. And that is the greatest success of all.